almost a decade or so. And today, I'm very privileged to have Professor Justin Lin, an economist and professor from the Peking University with us. He is the person who created this concept of new structural economics. So that will really look into how that we can reform the current modern economics that can bring equality and help a lot more people to grow. And also he was the former senior vice president and chief economist at the World Bank. So the topic that we have today, Peking winner, designing for a country growth model. Peking winner. So in your opinion, what are some of the winner qualities in terms of keep growth going and even boost growth a little bit?
Well, this is a very important question for every country. Because to use industrial policy to pick winners is a taboo in many corners in the world, especially in many multilateral development institutions.
Yes.
However, if you look the historical evidence, we cannot find any country to be successful and to become developed without using industrial policy to pick winners and to make those winners to be successful, to be driver of the growth of the country. And so, yes, many people had a reservation. It's because many industrial policy failed. But without industrial policy, no country can be successful.
But definitely we can see like industrial policies can be much long-term and versus a lot of countries or investors they are eyeing for like short-term gains and look at how volatile the recent days in the stock market. So what would you see the financial sector, the relationship between long-term plans versus short-term gains from the financial industry?
Well, industrial policies is a structural policies. Try to identify the sectors which the country, the next drivers of the country. And use the industrial policies to facilitate the growth of those kind of sectors. And to turn them from the infant to become the drivers of growth of the country. Certainly those kind of policy takes time. It's a structural policy for diversification, for industrial gradient.
Yes.
But you're talking about the current financial challenges. It's a short-term issues. You need to have a stabilization policy to cope with this kind of financial risk, financial challenges. But they are related. Because if you want to make the industrial policy to be successful, certainly you cannot have financial crisis. If you're in a crisis more, then you cannot, really implement those kind of structural policies. That's on the one hand.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if you have successful industrial policies, picking winners to make them very competitive and to diversify your economies, then you will be more resilient, you will be more stable, and you will have a larger scope to cope with all kinds of short-term shocks.
But speaking of those industrial policies or structural policies, and even including reforms, how should a country or a government or the state look into set up the right policies? Because if we look at today's world economy, a lot of it has been set, the standards have been set by developed nations. And what about those less fortunate, underdeveloped regions? How should they look up to, or how should they think about how to build up their economy?
Well, certainly countries are at a different stage of development. And in different stages of development, the driver of the growth will be different. And if you want to increase your income, you need to increase your labor productivities. And if you want to increase your labor productivities, you need to have higher value, more productive industries. And very often, you need to do from scratch. And then you need to identify the new sector which you can make that to be competitive in the world. And then consider what are the necessary ingredients make the industry to be competitive. And I can give you one example. For example, Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore, yeah.
In the 1960s, the main industries in Singapore were labor-intensive sectors, like textile,
Yeah.
garment, household appliances. Those are labor-intensive. And they rely on those kind of industry, they became newly industrialized economy. But they want to move up the industrial ladders in order to raise income. So at that time, they identify the petrochemical industries as their next drivers of growth.
Yeah.
But at that time, they only have oil refineries. They do not have a petrochemical, complex.
Yes.
And so, since they have a vision to develop that industries, they made studies about the upstream, downstream, in the petrochemicals, and to see, how to organize those upstream and downstream together. And after the study, they built a new island. Turns out island to be the industrial site of the petrochemical industries. And they built up all the necessary infrastructure, upstream, downstream. After they have the infrastructure there, they started to invite the existing firms in upstream and downstreams to make investment in that new complex. And at that time, how come this project became very attractive for the investors? Because in the 1970s, the upstream and downstream, they scattered around the world. And so the cost of logistics for the upstream and downstream was extremely high. And since the island connect all the upstream and downstream together, so your next door is your downstream, the other next door is your upstream. And under kind of situation, certainly, their cost of production will be much lower than they used to be. And so they invite about 20 leading firms in the world in upstream, downstream, and invite them to visit this new complex.
Yes.
And they convince those investors to come. So immediately it became a success. And now Singapore has the most competitive petrochemical industry in the whole world.
But definitely just building a new island to kind of boost its petrochemical industry, definitely I can see it needs a lot of money, a lot of determination, it's time consuming. And since we're in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi government had rolled out this Vision 2030 to boost its GDP and especially to increase the non-oil sectors, money from the non-oil sectors, and build like new energy vehicles from scratch, boosting tourism. But how hard is that, or how important is it to kind of build new industries?
Well, here you said certainly if you want to do those kind of petrochemical complex and build a whole complex, certainly you need to have a lot of financial investment.
Yes.
Yeah. And so if you want to pick the sectors, certainly you need to make the sector feature consistent with what you have, what kind of strengths you have. And like Saudi, they have many things.
Yeah.
Not only they have the petrochemical, they have the oil, petroleums, and they also have a lot of capitals. So the capital advantage is one advantage of the country. And they should use this advantage to leverage other advantages. And to identify the sectors, use their financial power, they can attract talents together and other ingredients for the sector to be successful.
But then what I see about like future growth for a lot of countries, it also needs a lot of collaborations. And again, for like the Singapore example that Professor Lin just brought up, it definitely, I think for Singapore alone, they cannot really make it happen. It's a brand new island with billions of dollars invested. And even here in Saudi Arabia, they're building this new sustainable city called NEOM. It needs a lot of infrastructure, a lot of investment. What do you see like the international investment or kind of international cooperation play into, for example, building a country growth model and to keep it sustainable?
Yeah, as I said, the country needs to use its advantage to leverage other countries' advantages.
Yeah.
If you want to build a new cities, certainly you need to invest a lot. The country has capital, so they can afford to do that. But it's not only money alone. You need to have the technology, because if you want to make this a green cities, you need to have the green technology. Solar power, wind powers, and those kind of technology exist in other countries like in China.
Yes.
But you also need to have cement steel. Certainly the country also has that. Yeah. And you need to have architecture to design the city for you, right? Yeah. So, the secret for success is that always start with what you have and leverage what you have with what you do not have, and turn that into something very competitive in the world.
But what we're seeing like today's economy, like is slowing down with rising inflation and geopolitical tensions, will it actually play into the factor that actually somewhat it will create more division or divide the world a little bit farther, and the underdeveloped region will become more underdeveloped and developing countries will make more money?
Well, yeah, here that certainly we are in a very uncertainty world. And in this kind of uncertainty world, many people will lose, confidence, lose their, hope for the futures. And under this kind of situation, I think it's very important for the country to have a longer-term vision, to know, where we want to go, and also to consider if we want to go from here to there, what would be the necessary, effort that we need to take. But at the same time, we know currently we have some challenges. And we need to prioritize some short-term stabilization effort in order to create the condition for the longer terms. And, certainly, the short-term challenges, if we can cope that will pave the foundation for our long-term development.
But speaking of all those uncertainties or black swan events, especially we're just coming out of a pandemic era, for the future policymakers, what are some areas that you think or you suggest that countries or policymakers should look into?
I think that the country may be in different stage of the post-pandemic era. Yeah. For example, China. Yeah. We just changed our policies. Yeah. We liberalized the economy. So I think we are going to have a rebound. And I think our growth in China will be high this year and become a driver for growth not only in China but also in other countries. But like in other countries, they already in the post-pandemic mode for about 2 years. Yeah. And before that, they spend a lot of money to support the consumption and so on. And so they print too much money. Yeah. So they may cause some kind of high inflation in the country. And at this stage, they may have to, the control the inflation to tighten the monetary supply, raise the interest. They may have a slow growth this year. Yeah. So I think the situation in the country, in the world, are different for countries. So we need to see the situation in the country to make a judgment.
But then for the goals of developing a country's growth model, should the policymakers focus on the numbers, or they should think far more than just numbers? Because for GDP growth, Saudi Arabia reached like 8.7%. That's the highest, fastest growing in the G20 group. And China said that the growth target for 2023, 5%, is still very high. And what's your take on the numbers?
I think that number is very important because that's give you the idea of the total growth. But quality is also very important. Yeah. And income distribution is also very important. And that's the reason why in China now we call high quality growth. You want to make the growth fast, but we also make the growth to be sustainable and to be inclusive. And with that, we call that high quality growth.
Absolutely, it's like bring more equality and China would say common prosperity to the society and to the world. And for the time being, I think we're running out of time. And thanks so much for Professor Lin share with us all the insights or whatnot. Yeah, it just hopefully that the humanity can find the winner for the growth model, right?
Very good.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.